Hello and welcome, I'm Dr. Troy Munson on Revealing Wholeness. Right now as I sit here, it is Friday the 13th. And with Christmas just around the corner, you may be hearing this or listening to this right around the time of Christmas, and I thought what fun it would be to talk about why Christmas is December 25th. Now, most people think, well, Jesus was born on Christmas. And ultimately, there's a lot of clues that says that he absolutely was not born on December 25th. And it's kind of fun to unpack some of these facts that are loaded in the Bible that kind of show us when he was likely born. And we'll explain why do we now then, have Christmas on December 25th. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But if we look back, we get a clue here. We have John being born, and of Elizabeth and Zachariah, we're told, was in the temple, taking care of the temple stuff. And if you don't know this, in the holiest of holies, nobody was allowed to go to see the Ark of the Covenant that contained the three things, Aaron's rod, the testimony, the law that was sent down from Moses, and all that was in that Ark of the Covenant. And there was a special room that only one of the priests would get chosen to go in and hear from God. And they would literally tie a rope around his ankle, because if he had any kind of error, sin, whatever, he would literally he'd die in the holiest of holies, and they would have to pull his body out because they weren't allowed to go in and get him. And so they tie a rope around his ankle. Could you imagine? I'm going to tie a rope around my ankle because I'm probably going to die going into this room because I'm unholy or whatever. But anyways, so he goes into the holiest of holies in the month of Abib, which happens to be June. And the month of Abib is named after, I believe, an old rabbi. And so that month of Abib, he was chosen amongst all of the rabbis for that particular month to go in. And he sees the angel, and the angel tells him that his wife in her old age, in her, I think, 60s, is going to conceive. And doesn't believe it. And so now he can't talk. He comes out, and they all realize that he's seen something miraculous, but he can't tell anybody. And his wife immediately becomes pregnant. And so when she's 6 months along, we're told that the Spirit comes upon Mary and tells Mary that she is favored above all, and that she will miraculously conceive the Son of God. And she goes to see Elizabeth when? She goes to see Elizabeth when she's 6 months pregnant, we're told in the Bible. Well, when is she 6 months pregnant? Well, she's 6 months pregnant in December. And so here's an interesting thing, that all Jewish people, I believe it's it's a Passover feast, and so all Jewish children at Passover feast, they set a place setting, and they have a chair that nobody sits at, because that's supposed to be for Elijah. Elijah is supposed to come, and his coming is supposed to bring in or herald the coming of the Messiah. And so they all set a place setting. To this day, they still set that place setting, and they're looking for Elijah. Well, when is the Passover? That is in the spring. So guess when John the Baptist was born? Probably right on that Passover date. And as Jesus says in the Bible, he says they just did not recognize him. Elijah has indeed come, pointing to John the Baptist. And so if we see that here we have Elijah, which was John the Baptist in spirit, being born in the spring, that means we back up 3 months, and here we have the darkest night of the year. And God chooses to bring the light of the world in at that darkest point, the conception of his Son. And so then 9 months later, we fast forward, and we now have the Feast of Tabernacles. And in John, he says, the Word was made flesh and tabernacled among us, or dwelt among us. He uses the word tabernacle. And we know that Jesus told Mary at his death that, lo and behold, here is your son, pointing to John. And John said to John, pointing to Mary, or indicating Mary, that here is your mother. And so he took care of Mary the rest of her life. And do you think they had conversations about when Jesus might have been born? Because that was her son. And so, of course, and so he's writing this book of John, one of the four Gospels, and he's giving us clues about when he was born, because he probably knew. And so here we have Jesus being born in September at the Feast of Tabernacles. Why else would we think that that might be true? Well, here we have these angels going to the shepherds who watch their flocks by night. And so here they are out watching their flocks. Well, I can tell you that they don't do that in the wintertime. They would have been doing that in December. It had been way too cold in those highlands. But in the fall, they would have. And so the angels go to them and they say, hey, come see this sight. Emmanuel is being born. And so they go and they see this. And so here we have these other clues that say, hey, I love the pictures that I've heard from some pastors. They said, if we as Americans said, hey, you're going to see this amazing sight in the playoffs of baseball, we would know that what we were going to see was not in the wintertime, because they don't play baseball in the wintertime. They play it from the spring through the fall. And so we would have known just by reading that we're going to see this amazing sight, and sometime maybe in summer or fall that we're going to see this amazing sight. Well, just as that was done, and they wrote this story in the Bible, they would have understood that no shepherds watch their flocks by night in December. They would have known that it was sometime else. And so just as that, we can take that. And so now people are like, well, why do we celebrate Christmas then? What's this Christmas tree? What's these Yule logs? And what's this holly and all the stuff that we put on? And what's funny is that we get the Christmas tree from the Babylonian. Even in the book of Jeremiah, it says, don't follow the pagans or the Babylonians, where they cut down a tree in the forest and they fasten it to two pieces of wood so it won't fall over, and then they worship it. And so we get these weird things. And what happened was after Christ's death, we have the whole Roman Empire is celebrating the darkest night of the year. In the Roman calendar, it's December 25th. In ours, it's December 21st because it's the solstice. But because that was the darkest night, they would throw a big party because it was so gloomy, so dismal, the weather was so bad, they couldn't do anything else, so they just threw a party to try and say, finally, we're starting to get lighter and lighter days instead of darker and darker days, and now spring is coming. That was the Feast of not of Tabernacles, but the Feast of Saturnalia, named it after one of their gods. Well, Constantine in 320 AD has this total encounter with Jesus and realizes that he is indeed who he is, and that he's the only God and one with all that. And so he changes the entire Roman Empire to Christianity in one fell swoop on that night. But he's like, how do I now get all these people to stop celebrating Saturnalia? And he goes, well, instead of stopping that big party, he basically redeems it like we do so many other things. He redeemed it and said, okay, the evergreen is going to stand for the everlasting, never dying Christ. And we're not going to call it Saturnalia, we're going to call it Christ's Mass, or his meal, or his supper table. And so we're going to call it Christmas. And we're going to have the holly as the drops of blood that came off his brow when he had the crown of thorns put in his brow. And the Yule log is this, representation of the light of the world coming in. And so we redeemed all these things, and yet we still celebrate them, even though they have pagan origins. But it's okay, because that's, we were broken too, and now we have this redemption as well. So it's kind of fun to look at this whole process. And just as a side note, as an extra to you, I love that many people don't understand, that are not Jewish, where Hanukkah comes from. Hanukkah starts on December 25th, and it's 7 days long, or rather, 8 days long. And the reason that it is because I think in 120 AD, there was a ruler that was just tyrannical of the Jewish people, and he wanted them to worship him. And so he goes into the Temple Mount, and he literally sacrifices a pig and spreads pig blood all over the temple. And he demands that they worship him, not the one true God. And in doing so, I believe he ran, or his reign was about another 8 years or something like that. Well, some of you may have heard of the Maccabees. It was a group of brothers. I want to say there was 7 or 8 of them. And they get up a bunch of people, and they now fight and they overthrow this ruler and kick him out of Jerusalem, and they cleanse the Temple Mount, but they light one of the menorahs. One of the menorahs they're these massive, I want to say they're about 7 or 8 feet round bowls that would sit on top of the Temple Mount on the corners, and they would have these massive wicks. And the wicks were old priest garments because they didn't know what to do with the priest garments because they would sacrifice animals and they would have blood all over them, and so they were still holy but soiled, and so they would use them as wicks in the center of the menorah. And the menorah would have enough olive oil that was consecrated to burn for 24 hours. So every day the job of the priest was to go up there with pitcher after pitcher of olive oil and fill these menorahs so that they would continue burning because it was a bad omen to have a menorah burn out. Well, when this ruler came in, he put out the menorahs and killed the pig and spread blood all over. The Maccabees go in, they oust him, they cleanse the area, and they light a menorah. Well, there's only enough oil for the menorah to burn one day, and they're like, we can't let it go out. And so they all gathered around, all the people, and they prayed to God to keep this menorah burning while they consecrated oil, because it took 8 days to consecrate oil in order to put in the menorah. So every day, as part of their jobs, was consecrating new oil, because in 8 days it would be ready to go in the menorah. So anyways, they all prayed, and that menorah stayed lit for 8 days. It did not burn out. And these menorahs, like I say, the light was so amazingly bright that you could see it for almost 100 miles. It was that bright. And so that's the 8 days of Hanukkah. So they give gifts every day that menorah was burning, and still burning when they got up in the morning. And so that's kind of a little history on Hanukkah, which I find rather interesting and really kind of adorable. But anyway, so that's kind of Christmas and why we do it, and that we do have redemption, and it's okay that we do celebrate, that we put up a Christmas tree. We don't bow down to the thing, but it's a representation of what we believe as a faith. So it's kind of interesting. So for those of you who never heard that, I hope that makes your Christmas, and you can share it and pass it on and just feel wonderful love and good vibes because of where we come from. And until next time, I'm Dr. Troy Munson on Revealing Wholeness.